Great, so I'll start sharing then. So welcome to the webinar, How to Feel Better. So we've had a bit of a little preamble before turning the camera on, just to let people know how we do in camera, and that we'll be taking questions and answers, but we'll do that at the end. So to welcome everybody who's watching this webinar, either here with us now or afterwards. And the focus very much is in identifying if you are struggling and you want to feel better. What's the how? How do you get from struggling to feeling better? And our premise and the premise of the First Aid for Feelings manual and all the work that we do, both in group and individual sessions, is actually that when you have that emotional and health literacy, you will learn and know how to interpret your feelings, how to interpret the symptoms you're experiencing. And that will then give you the clues in terms of how to respond to that, which then helps you to go on to that feeling better. So let's start with the welcome. So welcome aboard. This is about what the webinar is about. We'll talk about sort of the topics that we're going to cover. And then in terms of how you can pose questions. And so the people who are here in real time will be putting questions in through the chat. And Nikki will be picking those questions up as we go along. And then at the end, off camera, so not included in this recording, we will have an in-depth Q&A to get really to grips with some of the questions that you're struggling with and really sort of unpick maybe anything that was confusing or anything that didn't quite make sense. The topics we're going to cover are the what and why of feelings. Why do we have feelings? What is the point? And then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of different types of feelings. We'll then talk about how to contain or complete feelings, how to not get engulfed by feelings and not kind of try and push them away or block them. We'll teach you a technique called the ABC technique, and you will also talk about how to put together your own first aid kit for feelings. So it's the same principle as first aid kit that's kind of medical, got plasters and paracetamol. The same principle is applied here to feelings. So we'll talk about kind of a method for how to stock that kind of a first aid kit. And we'll also talk about the fundamental principle of personal agency. So personal agency isn't kind of necessarily a word that gets bandied about a lot, but actually the premise of that kind of how you are able to respond to what you're feeling, understand what you're feeling, is your ability to be in the driving seat of your own experience. And then what does that actually mean and how do I get there? So we'll cover that towards the end of the webinar. And then, like I said, putting questions in the chat, and then we can come to at the end. And then this part is mainly that kind of teaching and knowledge sharing, and then the questions and answers when we get practical. And then there's just like how to stay in touch and some details around that towards the end. So then let's get started. So before we start anything, and those of you who have been in consultations with me, you will know I do this all the time. So let's start by arriving here in this moment, because this is not about learning something from a sort of as a intellectual exercise. I really want to invite you to bring this to your actual experience. So I want to invite you to start by checking in, just noticing maybe your eyebrows. We often keep a lot of tension in our foreheads and our eyebrows, maybe squiggling your eyebrows a little bit. Particularly if you've been watching screens a lot, it can be helpful to kind of manually change the shape of your muscles around your eyes and can maybe ease the load on the eyes and the occipital lobe at the back that's processing all of this, taking in visual information. And then coming down onto your jaw, recognizing that maybe there's a bit of tightness there, there's the TMJ joint. Particularly if we're trying not to say something, if we're really angry or we feel really hurt or frustrated, we can often kind of clench our jaw as if we're trying to shut ourselves up so we're not speaking. But of course, what that means is that there's a lot of pressure on this joint, and that can lead then down into the shoulders and up into the head, causing various types of headaches and muscle aches around the neck and shoulders. Then that triangle of tension that we often have from the base of the skull out to the shoulders, a bit of like a coat hanger. We can keep a lot of tension on that. So maybe just rolling your shoulders a little bit, softening that triangle, changing its shape a bit to give your body a bit of a, oh yeah, we can settle into this space. And then maybe getting a sense of your torso, bringing your focus down, your torso down into your sitting bones, that pelvic girdle. I've got the hips, we've got a lot of bones and tendons, ligaments, muscles, and maybe just shuffling your sitting bones a little bit. I often describe it as like a cat really snuggling in or a dog. We're really just kind of settling ourselves into the seat. Coming down the thighs, through the knees, down to your feet, the soles of your feet, and just getting a sense of what they feel like, and then twiddling your toes, reminding your brain of the other end of your body. We sometimes find that we've been walking around all day as if we've just been these disembodied brains doing lots of thinking, but actually there's a whole body here. And sending signals all the way down to the toes is actually a little bit of it's almost like when you do a refresh on your browser, because the brain is having to send the signal all the way down and then wait for it to come all the way back up. And it just gives that little bit of a respite from other types of thinking in your brain in that moment. So now we've done a bit of a check-in, bit of arriving in the seat, getting a sense of here. I'd like to invite you to start with some observations. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Nikki and I are health activists and certainly kind of really passionate about helping ourselves and each other learn how to be with ourselves and how to really understand what's going on for us and being able to have that kind of feeling better life. So it can be interesting to think, for those of you who are here, what are you hoping to get from today's webinar? What has brought you here? Is it something that you're struggling with? Is it something where you feel reasonably skilled, but you want to upskill and understand things better? Is it anything in particular that sort of caught you in the blurb about this event that you were like, I definitely want to know something about that? So really making an observation, maybe writing it down. What are you hoping to learn from today's webinar? Secondly, then, how are you feeling in this moment? So we've done a bit of a check-in with your body. If you do, like a doctor will take your blood pressure and, temperature, we're doing our observations. So observations about thoughts, emotions, and sensations here in this moment. Are you feeling relaxed? Are you feeling a bit contracted? Are you feeling apprehensive, curious? Whatever it is. And my invitation to you is to choose 1 to 3 words to describe how you're feeling in this moment. And if you can and you want to, do write them down, because we're going to check in with our observations at the end of the webinar and just see what's different, if anything, at that point. And then I want you to take a bit of a reading, a bit like a meter reading or a temperature reading about how confident you are about being able to read and respond to your feelings at this point. If we think 10 is like I'm fully confident in my ability to read and respond to my feelings at all times, then that will be a 10. I don't ever feel confident in reading and responding to my feelings at any point ever. That will be a 0. So I would imagine most of us are somewhere on that spectrum. For me, I would say I'm about a 9, 9.5. There are definitely moments when my confidence drops. It could be because I'm tired, because I'm hungry. It could be because I'm in a very stimulating environment. So this week, Nikki and I were at the Poetry Pharmacy in London, which is in London, UK, for those of you who are not in the UK. It's on Oxford Street in London. And it's inside a shop that sells lots of sort of nice, I want to say smelly products, but gives all the whole wrong wrong image there. Sort of bath bombs and toiletries and lots of beautiful lush smells, hence the name Lush and then with the shop. But because we were there for like 6 hours from like 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, when we left, I think we were both feeling a bit like, whoa, because we are not used to being in that level of smell and sense. So that can sometimes just when the body's having to work really hard at processing stimulation, like scent or smell, that can also take a bit of a knock on, for example, confidence. And then, of course, there are other things like beliefs and the people that you're with. You might feel more confident one person or another person. So we're literally just talking about your level of confidence in this moment here now. And that is really because it's not fixed. So like you're saying, the confidence can move and fluctuate depending on what's going on. So we're just after the reading in this moment, and then we'll check in with that again at the end. So then what is first aid for feelings? The first aid is very much to help you make more helpful choices. That's the basic premise here, to help you figure out what's going on and respond more in a more helpful way. And I'd first developed first aid for feelings myself because I needed it myself. And I was in situations where I kept going like, I wish I'd said this, or I wish I'd done that, or if only. And I was like, I'm a reasonably intelligent person. Why didn't I realize this or that? And a big reason for why I didn't realize that is going to become clear on the next few slides. But it's also then to mitigate and take the intensity out of a situation. So it's almost like to not make things worse. If you're in a tricky situation or things have gone in a way that's not helpful, to help you not to take that another layer on top by adding stress into that situation, but to come back to yourself, come back to that place of growing strength of personal agency, which I hope you will start to feel or will grow after or during the webinar today. It's also to help support symptoms, recovery, personal development. Kind of if you're doing any recovery work, whether that's from a physical illness, mental illness, or combined, my personal experience that things tend to be across those spaces anyway. But it could also be if you're recovering from trauma, actually having something that helps you in the now is basically helping you to deal with sort of medium to longer term projects, which could be recovery or something else. And as always, that's kind of disclaimer that first aid for feelings is not therapy, it's not cure. It literally is first aid. It's like a plaster or a band-aid. And like with anything, obviously, if something needs further support, if you need to get professional help, just changing the plaster isn't going to help anything. It'll just keep the situation, maybe make it worse. So just that bit of proviso to bear in mind straight off the bat, particularly if you're new to first aid for feelings as a concept. It is literally what it says on the tin. It's that in the moment rapid response. But saying that, of course, the more you learn how to use first aid for feelings, the more you apply it, the more skillful you become. Of course, it becomes part of good habits, a good practice going forward. So then first question, big question. Why do you have feelings? And I think I often work with people who are like, I wish I just didn't feel at all. And I'm like, really? Would you? So if we start with the premise of all feelings are information. And the reason we're talking about feelings and not just emotions is that actually the word feelings, in English at least, encapsulates both emotions and sensations. So if you feel pain, you're feeling that pain in your body, but you're also likely to have some emotions about it. If you feel happy, you have got that feeling, the emotional feeling happy, but also there'll be a physical sensory response to feeling happy. There's a body information response to the feeling of happiness. So getting that mind-body connection, that these are always interconnected. As far as I can tell, you really can't have one without the other. And therefore, the word feeling is such a great way of describing it, but because it encapsulates both. And then the point that it's information. All feelings are information. If you are feeling in pain, there's something that's going on that needs addressing. What's causing the pain? What action is needed to address that pain? The same if you're feeling unhappy about something is happening that you don't like. Well, what might be the point of that? Actually, if there's something that you don't like, the reason you become aware that you don't like it is because there's some feeling that lets you know that you have a discomfort or you want to move away from it, or you this everything is like, ooh, I don't want that, I don't like that. And you may have that particularly if you think about food that you don't like or food that you like. And so it can be helpful to think of them as information. If you didn't have that information, what would happen? What might happen? And then the other one is like thinking about joy. Marie Kondo made famous, finding your joy, what gives you joy. And the body's really clever, or sort of our senses are really clever, because what's the purpose of joy? If you think about what might be the information in joy, well, the information in joy is like, I'd like a bit more of that. Thank you very much. So that without the steer of your feelings letting you know, you would really be flying blind. So then let's think about some of the more basics ones. So let's think about hunger. If you didn't feel hunger at all, at some point you would die because it is such a basic need for the body. We need fuel. And if we don't eat regularly, we are going to die of hunger. So the feeling of hunger is there to very much let us know something very important. But then let's think about things like second date. Yeah, so you can see I've got those words, second date, deciding on a new place to live, and clothes. So I just want to give some practical examples of actually how important and how influential feelings can be for us. Because many of us, particularly here in Britain, and I'm in the UK, I don't really do feelings. I've heard that phrase often, and I'm like, let's just check that out. So the examples I always give is like, well, assuming you have been on dates or you'd like to go on dates, uh, you might go on date with somebody that on paper is absolutely perfect for you. Maybe your friend has set you up and go, this person, you've got so much in common. I think you're going to hit it off brilliantly straight away. You go on the date and yeah, it's a nice person, but there is no chemistry. There's nothing that's kind of creating that feeling of connection. And so think about what would make you decide where to go on the second date. And when you think about it, I'm pretty sure with that kind of person, when it was all looking fine, but actually there was no chemistry, I would be, yeah, you probably thinking you wouldn't go on that second date. And then if we take the other way around, you go on a date with somebody who, to all intents and purposes, should not be your kind of person at all. And then you get on really well. And there's a real feeling and vibe of connection. And of course, when it comes to the question of second date, you're going to be, yes, let's do a second date. Even if on paper or whatever predestined checklist, you shouldn't have that much in common. And the same in terms of deciding on a new place to live, whether it's a flat or a house, whether you're renting or buying. You might have your criteria. You want this many bedrooms, you want this kind of garden or not, or access to transport. You go and look at a property and it's just doesn't feel right. And then you go on another kind of wild card property, the property maybe the estate agent recommended, and you're like, okay, I'll humor you and go and see it. You walk in the door and you're just like, yes, I want to live here. So that kind of sense that actually maybe we may have these sort of thought-based ideas of what we like and what we don't like. But actually, when it comes down to really important decisions, it's more often our gut, it's more often our feeling that will make that, have that decisive vote. The final one I've added in is clothes. That's when something fits or doesn't fit. And it's interesting how often we can stumble over lots of things when it comes to clothes. The kind of body image, our sense of gender, fashion, lots of things can affect how we feel in clothes and the clothes we choose to wear. But at the end of the day, we very rarely wear hugely uncomfortable clothes unless there's a really big reason for it. You're trying to fit into a dress for an evening, and you're making yourself like hardly breathe at all so you can fit into the dress. But actually, does that end up supporting your experience of the evening, or does it actually mean that you are slightly uncomfortable the whole time? So I want to invite you to take a moment to just check in. We've talked about feelings as information, and that includes all feelings. And just to have a sense, how is that resonating with you? Any questions that are coming up? And do add them into the chat function if something that comes to mind. So we then want to talk about, well, how do you know you're feeling a feeling? What lets you know? What are your senses? When you feel overwhelmed, what lets you know you're feeling overwhelmed? Often it's like feeling like, oh, I just can't take on anymore, or that feeling like I can't think. My brain is just like jammed, like it's like a big traffic jam on the motorway. Or physical, mental, emotional stress that can often feel very speedy, feeling very fast, or feeling jittery or agitated. Physical, emotional pain, we can really feel kind of that contraction, feel really that woundedness. Tiredness or fatigue, we can feel like struggling to keep our eyes open. We haven't got space to talk about that today, but actually on the First Date with Feelings website, there is a blog where we talk about 5 different types of tired. So if tiredness is something that's important to you or is affecting you a lot, or fatigue, I encourage you to go on the website and look for if you just put in the search bar, put in fatigue or tiredness, and that should bring you that blog. And that actually applies to most of the things, overwhelm and pain. There will be also blogs that are relevant to those topics. And also, how do you know you're feeling anxiety or panic attack? It's very interesting how often panic attacks and heart attacks get confused. People might be thinking they're having a heart attack, but actually they're having a panic attack. And it can be really hard to actually become familiar with differentiating the two, particularly if you're new to this. You haven't really been learning a lot about panic or anxiety, because you might think that it comes with this big neon sign that says panic, or thoughts that come, I'm anxious, but actually that's rarely the case. Anxiety and panic attacks tends to show up in physical symptoms, like struggling to breathe, like feeling pain in your chest, feeling really dizzy, feeling nauseous. These are all very clear anxiety or panic attacks, but we may often attribute them to something else. Even feeling a sense of vertigo, so feeling so dizzy and that kind of not feeling quite like you've got your feet on the ground, can be part of how anxiety or panic attacks show up. What about guilt or shame? How do you know you're feeling guilt or shame? Do you know the difference between guilt and shame? So there's sort of we can cover this more in the Q&A at the end, but sort of the shorthand with guilt and shame is that guilt tends to be about behavior. I feel guilty because I did something, or I feel guilty because I didn't do something. Yeah. Whereas feeling shame tends to be about who you are as a person. I'm so ashamed that, I'm the kind of person who would do something like that. Or I'm so ashamed that, a person knows this about me. Or I feel so ashamed that I struggle with reading, for example. I work with quite a lot of people who are neurodivergent in some way, often got dyslexia or dyscalculia. And for those of you who don't know what dyscalculia is, that is about numbers and time, perception of time. Maybe if you're always late for things and you think there's some sort of a character defect, it might actually be in part because of dyscalculia, because of the way the brain is wired and perception of time. So we can carry shame around kind of more sort of identity level, sort of how we perceive ourselves to be and who we are, rather than necessarily what we do. So that's kind of a shorthand for the difference between guilt and shame. But like I said, if there are any questions on that, we can come to that in the Q&A at the end. Frustration and irritation. Yeah, so that's like like kind of like a headshot just goes shoo, where we're kind of feeling frustrated or irritated or something is just bugging us. It's not necessarily that we're, in rage or in anger, but we're just on edge. And do you know how that feels? Do you know why you're feeling like that? And one of the things we can check in with there is actually, are you hungry or are you tired? Are some of those things driving the adrenaline in your body, which is then driving the frustration or irritation that you're experiencing? And that'll probably make more sense when we talk about in the next slide. Then regret and remorse. Yeah, I wish I had, or if only. They can be sort of similar to grief, but they're actually quite different. Regret and remorse is when we wish we had done something differently. But the thing is, we can give ourselves a really hard time. We can be very unkind to ourselves in that moment when we are talking about wishing we had something differently or doing something differently. Because what we're often not taking into account is the information we had available to us at that time. And this is where the ABC technique can be really powerful when we get to that in a minute. So actually, how do I stop showing up with regret? How do I stop getting stuck on regret again and again and again? And to have a technique for that and actually able to work with that in a very specific way. And then grief or sorrow. How do you know you're feeling those feelings? What lets you know? You may think it's only, that only when you're crying, that you're in tears, that's grief and sorrow. But actually, some people, express grief, or we all express grief in really different ways and respond to it differently. I've worked with somebody who just went and had lots of sex because that was the only way that she could kind of deal with, feeling it, because in sex, she was in the moment. So she just went and had sex with lots of people, and then she had lots of regret about it. It was a very confusing experience. And so, how do I care for grief? How do I actually do it in a way that feels proportionate and appropriate? So, I'd be curious to know maybe some of the feelings that you're struggling with, if you feel like sharing that in the chat, or when we go into the Q&A, to maybe just think about, are there any of those that you'd like to explore a bit more that we can do in the Q&A at the end? So then I want to invite you. So the second bullet list there on the screen, I want to invite you to think about, well, what if you never felt the physical and mental and emotional stress? What if you never felt overwhelmed? What if you never felt pain? What if you never felt tired or fatigue or anxiety or panic attacks, get guilt, shame, any of those feelings? If you just take a moment to think, what if I didn't feel those feelings at all? Just do a thought experiment and just take a breath in. Imagining a reality where there are just none of those feelings. And then once you've taken a breath or two, I'm kind of checked in with that question. What if I didn't have any of those feelings? And then I want to ask you, would that be helpful? And I mean that very genuinely, to get curious about, would it be helpful if you never felt overwhelmed? Well, if we think about overwhelm in particular, because that's an example we use in the manual, overwhelm is there to let you know when that your resources, your time, and the tasks you have to do in that time are don't add up. When you've got more to do in your day than you've got physically time for, you've got energy for, or if you've got resources for, whether that's money or something else, we feel overwhelmed. So overwhelm is a really important. And I talk about there's a recording on the Insight Timer meditation app where you can find a lot of my recordings and also the First Little Feelings course on that meditation app platform. There's one of the most popular meditations on there is about the feeling of overwhelm and the gift of overwhelm. Because I invite you to really turn that on its head rather than thinking, I wish I never got overwhelmed. To think about, actually, if I didn't feel overwhelmed, there would be nothing to let me know that I'm in too deep, that I'm taking on too much, that I haven't got enough energy to do what I'm expecting myself to do, or I haven't got enough resources, I haven't got help from my teammates or from my friends or family to deliver what I want, what I'm expecting myself to deliver, the tasks that I'm expecting myself to do. And then in terms of things like guilt, yeah. So if you never felt guilt, and people are like, yeah, massive, great, wonderful. But actually, sometimes if we didn't feel guilt, we wouldn't know what we genuinely wanted to do. And maybe somebody was blocking us from doing it. I'm like, but actually, that was really important to me. And we got distracted by maybe somebody else's values and somebody else's priorities. And then, do you know your own feelings? Do you know your own language? Do you know if you know how does your body speak to you? How do your emotions speak to you? And if you feel reasonably well literate in that, it's like, yes, I've got a really reasonably good sense of that. Great. Well, can you make that a bit more nuanced? Or if this is all brand new to you, if you think about it as language, is that helpful? So I remember working with somebody and we were talking about this. It was in a group setting. We were talking about this, and he suddenly kind of piped up, "My body speaks Russian." And I was like, "Okay, tell me a bit more." And he was like, "Yeah." So he was in his early 20s, and he was saying he'd been with his parents on a trip to Moscow. They were on the Red Square. They were trying to find their way somewhere, and his dad was asking somebody for directions. And and his dad asked the question, "Do you know where this place is?" And the person replied in Russian. So what his dad did was just speak louder. So he just he asked the question louder, and the person responded louder in Russian, and they couldn't understand each other. So they ended up speaking really loudly at each other until they were kind of arguing, and then kind of stormed off in different directions. And the guy was like, "Well, that's what my body is doing. My body is trying to communicate to me, how I'm feeling, and I keep shouting at it back." But I'm actually not taking the time to understand the language. What does my body mean when it does this or that? And so actually getting a sense of literacy, that reading and responding, getting curious about when I feel like this, what is the clue behind that? What information can I sort of Sherlock, if you think of getting your Sherlock on that kind of Sherlock Holmes, the detective, what information can I gather about what is actually going on for me in this moment? So here, remember to put your questions in the chat. So Nikki will be gathering those questions and we'll be coming to them at the end. And when we do our Q&As, we're just taking a moment because that's quite a lot of information we've been sharing here. And if anything needs clarifying, then I'm always very happy to do that. So then we come to, okay, so you're getting to understand the language of your body, you're getting to understand of your sensations and of your emotions. So what is this choosing your response about? How do I actually do that? How can I do things differently so I don't end up regret and remorse all the time? Or how I don't end up, being aggressive to the friends and family or colleagues? What is that all about? So then we're moving into the sort of what is happening in your body. So we're starting with my favorite metaphor, which is the 3-scoop ice cream. So you may have seen a video, you may have heard a recording on Insight Timer, you may have been on a webinar before. We talk about the 3-scoop ice cream. If you have, please bear with us. If you haven't, one of my favorite brain scientists, Professor Linden, he describes the brain as a 3-scoop ice cream. So I'm really all for plain language and making things relatable. So I really get the kind of three scoop thing. So if you've ever had a three scoop ice cream, you know there's a cone, and that's basically from the neck down. The bottom scoop, which kind of sits in the cone, is the oldest part of the brain, and it's the part of the brain that we share literally, not metaphorically, with reptiles. Hence, I talk about it as the crocodile scoop. It's a very basic level of thinking, basic functions, hunger, so food, sex, sleep, pain, very much in that part of the brain. We've then got them, so yeah, so it's also called the reptilian part of the brain. The second part of the brain that I refer to as the group scoop is often referred to as the mammalian part of the brain from mammals. So humans, dogs, horses, whales, basically the mammal sort of mammal development is called the limbic system as well in the brain. It's that social intelligence. That social intelligence about groups and belonging, social intelligence being reading other people's sort of, is this person angry or happy? And there has been, for full disclosure, we are a bit more advanced on this now in terms of how the brain works. It's not quite this way, and of course, uh, other, birds or fish or other kind of insects, other animals have their own way of doing this. But in terms of the humans, this is kind of mostly not fully, but mostly where our emotional intelligence sits. So there's a kind of middle part of the brain. And then the top scoop is the frontal lobe, that kind of part that's behind your forehead, where we have executive function. It's that ability to think about thinking, which is often called theory of mind, where we can reflect. It's also where we can figure out how to use Eventbrite to join interesting webinars. And we can find our way to actually joining that webinar. We can send a man to the moon, those kind of things. Well, some of us can. So this is the part of the brain that can do all of that kind of rational logic. So the thing about the top scoop is that it needs to have enough resources to work on, because the brain is one of the most energy intensive organs that we have. It uses, when we're just idling, when we're not doing anything particularly stressful, or intense, it uses 20% of all our available energy. So if you imagine you've got 100 units of anything, 20 just go straight into just running the brain. So which is why when there's an intensity of stress, we tend to lose some of that cognitive function. So the body decides in the stress response to actually take out some of that rational function, because in that moment, for example, if you're faced with a tiger, or you're faced with a situation on the roads where you're having to make a very quick swerve to get out of the way or something, actually having the ability to think through all the different scenarios, or think through whether that tiger had breakfast or not, or whether that tiger had a happy childhood or not, it's kind of a waste of resources. You need all your resources to go into your arms and legs, into that stress response that can respond like that. Before you even thought about it, you've gone a different direction, or you've punched that tiger on the nose, or run away up a tree, or whatever. So that kind of recognition that the more stressed you are, the less you're able to use that cognitive thinking part of your brain, which is why we have those arrows going in opposite directions. And that, of course, means that when you're in a situation that you are feeling stressed, you're feeling overwhelmed, you've only got the crocodile part of your brain to access, you are likely to make very primal choices, very kind of maybe unskillful choices, because you haven't got that executive function to lean into. So I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a rough sketch of the three scoop ice cream, and that sense of the alignment between the three. Now, how do you know which one you're in? So when you feel like we're all in this together, you've got a sense of belonging, you've got a sense of kind of connectedness to yourself and others. That's when you're likely to have all three scoops aligned, and not very much adrenaline driving down your executive function. If there's a bit of adrenaline going on, there's a bit of threat maybe, we can go into us and them. And we can see this particularly in politics, across the world. I know there are people here from different countries, and there can often be a very strong kind of us and them language. And that tends to be because there's a sense of threat. We feel threatened by the other group, threatened by the other. And so we can struggle to see our humanity. We can struggle to see what we have in common. And we focus more on what we don't have in common. And then if we increase the threat even more, then we lose even that sense of belonging to, our immediate group. and it's me versus everyone else. And I think this is very important when we come to like when we are snapping at our children or spouses or family members, when we go, I can't believe I just did that. We do behaviors that are kind of out of character, that we don't really want to, you know, I don't want to see myself as this kind of person. And that's because at that point, you're doing what we call crocodiling. So, crocodiling is actually a phrase, it's a description. I actually didn't come up with it, somebody that I work with. And she said, actually, my husband was crocodiling, so I realized I didn't have to crocodile back. And I think that was a great way of using the language. But it's when you're reacting from the most primal part of your brain, referred to as the reptilian part of the brain, the crocodile brain. So at that point, you haven't got access to the part of your brain where you can feel empathy or see or make more helpful choices. So remember when I was talking about, I wish I hadn't done this, I wish I hadn't done that, or that, or if only I'd done this. In those moments, there would have been so much adrenaline and cortisol and those stress hormones in your system that you didn't have access to the part of your brain that was able to feel empathy, that was able to remember what might be more helpful. And I found for me, this is where I was able to be much more empathetic to myself. That when I realized I was in those states, actually, I wasn't in control of those more skillful responses. I needed to have a step in between. And that's where we come to the technique, the ABC technique. Yeah. So the thing is, when you become aware, I'm crocodiling, I'm feeling really stressed, I'm feeling really angry, I'm feeling really overwhelmed, I'm feeling that intensity of feeling, that is your clue to not do something else. So actually, the next thing that is likely to be most helpful is actually to do your ABC. Is actually to step back and go, oh, I am aware that I am crocodiling. I'm aware I'm overwhelmed. I'm aware I'm stressed. I'm aware whatever it is. And then at that point, to actually name it, give it a name, because as soon as we give it a name, we've got a little bit of distance. It's like, oh, I can look at it. Then the next step is to come to your breath and body. And I want to do together one of the two main exercises that we do, which is the 3-5-7 breathing exercise. The reason why we do that and why the B is the breath and body is because the breath is always in real time. The breath is the only thing that you can control in that moment, even if you're struggling just a little bit, that's within your control. So what we want to do is we want to lengthen the exhalation. We want to make the out breath longer than the in breath, because when we do that, you are literally, again, not metaphorically, you are literally changing the biochemistry in your body, because you're breathing out more carbon dioxide and taking in less oxygen. And that changes the ratio in your body, which, oh, by the way, gives you access to a bit more of your top scoop. So you're changing that biochemistry and moving out of the stress response into more of that into more of that healing state, that recovery state, often referred to as rest and repair. We also want to do something with your body. So you may remember at the beginning when we were doing the shoulders and doing the twiddling toes. Again, because you can't catch up on breath from last week and you can't stash away some breath for next week, that kind of breath is always in real time. And those kind of parts of your body, the fingers, toes, that kind of limbering up in that moment, bringing you back to the present moment. So let's do that together. So the 3-5-7 is something we do 3 times, hence the 3. The 5-7 is breathing into the count of 5, breathing out to the count of 7. So we will do that 3 times together. So with me, counting you in. So breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then giving your breath a bit of bumper space in between. And then for the second time, breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Again, if you're struggling with these numbers, adjust them. If you want to do 2 till 6 or make them a bit shorter, that's absolutely fine. Really honor how it feels in your body. And we're just taking the space in between to give the lungs a bit of flex time. And then now for the third and final time, breathing in, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathing out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And you may find on that last out breath that you want to do a big one or you want to do a yawn, or you feel like you need to do a few short ones. Really allow your lungs to sort of lead the way here, because your lungs will be letting you know what kind of breathing is helpful to you in this moment. And then what we want to do, particularly if you're feeling a bit lightheaded, if you're not used to this kind of breathing, we want to bring your focus into your body. So rolling shoulders if you can, as always be respectful of any pain or discomfort that you have in your body. Maybe even stroking down from your shoulders down to the fingertips. Yeah. Those of you who have got cats, dogs, or bunnies, you will know that the hackles go up when they feel threatened. And when we stroke down from the head down to the tail, they go, oh. Guess what? Humans not so different. So we're doing that. May want to do that again. Shoulders, from shoulders down to fingertips, one side and then the other. And then maybe shuffling your sitting bones a bit. And then coming down to your toes. If you can move your toes in some way or flex your ankle joint. Just connecting the brain back to the body to remind yourself, I'm here now in this moment. And then on choice, well, whatever you were feeling, that word you wrote down, the feeling you had in the beginning, is it helpful? Is there anything about that feeling that would be helpful to keep, to do, to continue to do? And if that's so, great, keep doing that. If it isn't, if it feels like, oh, really uncomfortable, let's have a think about what might be more helpful instead. What might be a more helpful choice? And it could be something as, I just need 5 minutes to I need a break to get my thoughts together, get my bearings, to just give yourself a bit of bumper space. Or it might be just to leave the situation, pause it, come back to it, to do something different. So that helpful choice is something that often can take a while to work out. And we do in the early days, in the beginning, we often have to do it retrospectively. So we do it as almost like a reflective practice. We look back at a situation and kind of deconstruct and think, oh, I think that might be more helpful. And then do experiments. Next time you're in that situation, do an experiment to doing things differently. So that ABC, and for those of you who have learned medical first aid, you will know that the ABC is, of course, taken from medical first aid, airways, breathing, and circulation. So then when you're in a situation, you've got to the C and you go, actually, I'm not able to care for this feeling. I'm not able to get curious about the information in it. In that moment, when you haven't got the resources, you haven't got the context. So you may be with other people, or you're like, it's the middle of the night, you're really tired. Then actually, so the thing to do then is to contain, is to make an agreement with yourself. Yeah, it's a negotiation. Yeah, you set a time to care, a date and time to care for this feeling. Like, I don't know about your self-talk, but this is my self-talk. I'll be like, okay, sweetheart, okay, honey, we're not able to care for this in this moment. I'm not really quite sure what this feeling means. I promise I will come to this feeling tomorrow afternoon when we've got a bit of space. Yeah, so depending on how you're talking to yourself or how, you can use some of my language if that feels helpful. If that doesn't feel relevant to you or you're not used to talking about yourself as a sweetheart or honey, be respectful of how you want to talk to yourself. But that kind of, the main thing is to actually ask that feeling to wait. That's basically what you're doing. But you're not to wait indefinitely, to wait until this point, this date, this time. And for those of you who've got kids, yeah, if you ask your child to wait and you don't keep your promise, they will learn very quickly to ignore your request to wait. But if you say, wait until I've done this and then I'll give you my attention, and you deliver on that promise, you will know that your child will learn that actually that it's worth waiting, and they will get a much better attention from you if they wait. Grown-ups, not that different. When we ask our feelings to wait, we have to honor that promise. And then when we come back to it, to then care for it in whatever way feels helpful at that point. And also when we're containing, we often maybe need to distract, we need to do something different. So I'll be talking about that when we get to the first aid kit for feelings in a minute. Then in terms of completing, actually, yes, I do have the time to complete this feeling. I do have the resources. It's not the middle of the night. I'm not, surrounded by people who I don't feel safe with. Then it's about getting curious. We talk about Sherlocking, again, taking from Sherlock Holmes, following the clues. What might this feeling mean? What might be the information underneath driving this feeling? And it can be helpful to do that with a trusted ally. That could be a professional or a friend or a family member. It could be sort of downloading or expressing, whether that's through music or writing or, in some way, actually spending a bit of time with that feeling, getting curious about. And always that kind of, I wonder what the clue might be. What is this feeling trying to tell me? So that's the kind of, when you get to do the ABC, you get to the C, you're like, can I contain or complete this feeling now? And if you can complete it, great, go for that. If you need to contain, because in that moment it's not helpful, make sure that you make specific when and where you're going to do that, so that your feelings can start to trust that you will come back to them. You're not just going to ignore them and go la 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 or whatever. I don't want to feel you. Yeah, because then that's when feelings come up again and again and again and again, and you're just stuck on that roundabout. And then you have a choice, you can just continue to do what you just keep doing, or you can think about what might be a more helpful choice, what might be a more useful choice. And there will be challenges. Absolutely. You're building new neural pathways in your brain when you do that. You are literally teaching yourself a new habit. There can be quite a few challenges when we embed a new choice. So you need to get curious about, well, why would I bother to do that? What might be a strong enough incentive for me to do that? And then who can help me do that? Yeah, because you've got a choice. You can do that same choice. You can keep things just as that to the end of your life. When you're in that rocking chair at the end of life, you keep doing what you've always done. And like somebody said, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. I think Nikki reminded me that was Henry Ford, wasn't it? Who said that? And if you're happy with that, great. But I imagine if you're on this webinar, you'd like to change something. And so this is about keeping it real, that there are likely to be some challenges, some hurdles, and seeing it, as something to expect and something that you need to then figure out and work. And that's part of the practice, really changes that mindset into a growth mindset. So again, I can see there's some questions come through and Nikki is picking them up. So we'll come to that in the Q&A. So then let's talk about that last bit, that first aid kit for feelings, taken from the same idea as a medical first aid kit, as plasters and paracetamol, but we're talking about an orange one. As you can see, the orange color is like the helpful color. It's the color associated with the question, is it helpful? And the main premise here is like, if you don't know where your plasters and paracetamol are, you're not going to find it when you're bleeding or when you've got a headache. If you don't know where your resources are for when you're struggling with any other feeling, then you're not going to be able to access them. So insight in mind, it needs to be somewhere, it needs to be somewhere visible. And then what goes into the first aid kit, this is our kind of one of the profiles that we have, which is coming to your senses. Something to listen to, whether that's a relaxation meditation or whale sounds or music or whatever, or something that you can listen to that helps you access a different state. The eyes are what you can see, so that's videos, films, TV, pictures, the view out your window, anything that comes in through your eyes. The tongue is there to remind us of our senses, of our sense of taste. So many of us have comfort foods, often from childhood. This is apparently something that the Brits often talk about. This is Heinz tomato soup as a comfort food, but a number of people have named that. I've tried Heinz tomato soup, doesn't do anything for me. I think you have to be born in this country or raised in this country to feel that's a comfort food. But it's that, what is your comfort food? What is sort of, and of course, this is not about eating your feelings, which is a whole other aspect. This is about giving comfort to yourself in a way that's proportionate and sort of appropriate. And it can also be like not drinking more coffee, actually having more water. So it's also both about fluids and solids there. The finger is about sense of touch, having things, many of us are more tactile than we realize. So having things that you touch, whether that's something specific or like I've got here on my desk, I've always got a little pebble that I just like to touch and connect with. So they're things that have meaning for you. The same with smells. I was talking about this Lush shop in the beginning. Smells have a really powerful effect on our senses, particularly our stress response. So some smells and scents can really soothe us quite quickly. And then you can see that location mark, and that's about places. So one of my first aid spaces is the cinema. The cinema, I can go and and I almost like have a movie by prescription, movie for motivation, movie for a bit of crying, movie for, bit of rah-rah room, So where are the places that you go to that give you access to particular feelings? So another one of my spaces is going for walks, particularly in the woods, or going for walks when I can see big skies. Uh, so having a sense of actually where are your places? Where do you go to? And are they accessible to you? So I remember working with somebody who was in the AA and so on this 12-step program, recovering from addiction. And so she always made sure before she traveled quite a lot for work. So she always made sure that she knew where the AA meetings were in the city that she was. So because she had traveled like 200 days a year. So she was rarely or, in her hometown, but she could always access that network wherever she was. So it might be a place of faith. It might be a sense of camaraderie with a group that you feel you belong to, but getting a sense of what are those places and spaces that help you access more resourceful states for yourself. So we talked about feelings of information, whether they're difficult feelings or easy feelings, whether it's hunger, anger, joy, pleasure, they all let you know something. We've talked about that kind of learning them as language, the language of your body and yourself, how you get a sense of who you are, what you like, what you don't like. And we've talked about the ABC technique, the awareness, breath, body, and choice. And within that, we've also added in the containing, completing. Can you contain this feeling now? Sorry, can you complete this feeling now? Or do you need to contain it and come back to it later? And then let's come to actually, why is that important? So the question here for you, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, why this matters. But I'd like to ask you, how much or how little do you feel in the driving seat of your feelings and of your life? So again, if you score on the scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being like fully in control of my life, fully in the driving seat of my feelings and life, and 0 is like no control at all whatsoever. And I remember working with one guy when we had this conversation. He realized not only was he not in the driving seat, he was not in the passenger seat, he was not even in the back seat, he was in the boot of the car. He felt so little in control in terms of his own life, that it was quite sobering for him to realize just how strong that feeling was. So just take a moment, jot down a number. And this is not a test. It'll be subjective. It might be a little bit more, a little bit less at different time, but just in this moment, how much or how little do you feel in the driving seat of your feelings and your life? And this matters because this describes personal agency. So personal agency is it's a phrase that doesn't often get bandied about, but it is something that does really matter. And the description I have is personal agency describes your ability to be the agent in your own life. So you're the one acting. You're not being the recipient of somebody else's action. It's about knowing who you are. It's about your beliefs, knowing what you like, what you don't like, knowing what you need. Do you need company? Do you need solitude? Do you need this, do you need food? Do you need space? Do you need company? Do you need to be talked to in a certain way? And how to advocate for yourself. How do you let people know these are my boundaries? These are my needs. How do we negotiate your needs and my needs? Because it's all about knowing and feeling that you're in the driving seat of your own experience that helps you take those choices and really lean into what can feel at times uncomfortable when we start to do new choices. We start saying no, for example. I was working with somebody and she started to say no to her husband when he comes home from work and says the house needs hoovering. So she started saying, well, yeah, it does, rather than saying, oh, I'll do it now. Yeah, that actually he was not happy about that. So actually getting a sense of you're doing this because you want to be more and more in control of your own life rather than being the recipient or in the passenger seat of somebody else's. And that's that kind of sense of driving seat metaphor, that you are the one in that driving seat rather than being driven to whatever is happening in your day and in your life. So any questions around that? Let's bring that into the Q&A because I imagine that would be something that's really important. And then, of course, whatever that number was, 3 out of 10, 6 out of 10, what strengthens personal agency? Well, guess what? It's the ABC technique and starting your own first aid kit. Starting to use those tools in, experiment with them in a practical way in your day. And there are videos on our YouTube channel and places where you can find help to do this. But just thinking about, actually, I'm going to practice doing this technique. I'm going to find 1 or 2 things to put in my first aid kit. Oh yeah, that movie I really like. So one of the things I use, so I've had a really intense week and I just needed a bit of coach this coaching this morning. So I watched a couple of episodes of Ted Lasso. Don't know if you watched Ted Lasso. He's an American football coach who comes over to the UK to train a UK football team, and I really like his coaching style. So when I need somebody to lean into, I check in with him, and also the people I love and I know love me and who will be able to give me that bit of support when I need it. So those are like for me, the Ted Lasso series is in my first aid kit. It's like, yes, I know that. I know what I need, and I can reach for it when I need it. And the more you do that, guess what? The more you do that, the more you do that. And the more and more you're in those more helpful states, and you start to feel better more and more of the time. So we've come to the end of the teaching part. So I wanted to invite you just take a moment to check in again with your body and your being, like we did in the beginning. There's quite a lot of information, quite a lot of different ideas. Some of them might be familiar to you, some of them may be quite new to you. So just as you allow that to settle, let's check in with the body. So as always, we start in with the eyebrows, maybe just squiggling eyebrows a little bit. Maybe if you've been looking at the screen quite a lot, we can kind of get a bit fuzzy on our forehead. And then coming down to the jaw, maybe just do moving your mouth and a my words, moving your mouth a little bit. Yeah, just softening that jaw. Then coming down to your neck and your shoulders, dropping your focus down through the torso, down to the pelvic girdle, to the sitting bones, maybe rolling or shuffling your sitting bones a little bit. Coming down the knees, through the knees, down to your feet, down to the soles of your feet and the tips of your toes, giving your toes a bit of a twiggle. Yeah. And then let's do the observations again. So how are you feeling in this moment? If you choose 1 to 3 words to describe how you're feeling now, is that different from how you were feeling at the beginning? And then how confident are you feeling now about reading and responding to your feelings? Again, using that scale of 0 to 10. You don't need to look at what the number was in the beginning. Just give a sense of how does it feel now? And then what's the key learning that you're taking from today's webinar? What's the kind of key message? And following on from that, what kind of one action, one choice, one thing, something practical can you take forward from today? And if you'd like some feedback from me, I'd love to get your answers on, and you can email me, thora@isithelpful.com. So if you feel like sharing, that would be lovely. I'd really welcome that. It can take me a few days to reply, so do bear with me. But you don't need to. Just take, this is information for you. This is you learning about you. And then if you're interested how to stay in touch, if you're not on the newsletter, you can sign up for the newsletter on the website. You can buy the manual, the First Aid for Feelings manual, the book in the shop. You can connect with us on Instagram and LinkedIn and Facebook. Like I said, email me directly. Or if you want to download the Insight Timer app. I know there are a few of you here that know me through the Insight Timer app. But if you're not familiar with that, it's an app that you can download and you get access to free recordings and come to the weekly live events on Thursdays. You do have to pay a subscription to get access to all the courses, which includes the First Aid for Feelings course. So we're coming to the end of the teaching part. So I will now stop recording. For those of you watching this after the event, do get in touch if there's anything like a bit of clarification on, or if you'd like to stay in touch, I'd be really keen to hear from you. But from here, whatever you can take forward that's going to be helpful, I do wish you all the very best. And that it's more helpful to be curious and critical. So do bear that in mind. A bit of curiosity will go a long way.